On August 23rd, trains were blown up in Moscow as well. Fuck, that was a massive hit, guys. Train convoys with hundreds of tanks are burning. A railway collapse has begun. This is fucked, gentlemen. A series of explosions on the railways of Moscow, St. Petersburg, the Moscow region, and Crimea. People in Moscow are panicking. There's a crush, total collapse.
They got hit, look.
They hit the base. Those bastards are finished. The Novoshakhtinsk oil refineries were blown up by missiles. The Druzhba oil pipeline was sabotaged. In short, down the drain, everything's gone to hell. How are you doing? ASBU continues the special operation. Train convoy 1, Putin 2. Train convoys carrying tanks and military equipment have been blown up. The SBU struck a locomotive with a column of enemy vehicles, 13 tanks and over 100 units of armored vehicles. Putin urgently left for the Kremlin. He is furious. The convoy was attacked by drones as part of the special operation. A web. This is the end, gentlemen.
What is this? Basically, it's a fire. I can see the flames, they're huge.
It could be ammonia. If it's ammonia, it should go down, as the plant says. A drone just took off. A series of explosions in Moscow, the Moscow region, and Tula region in Russia. Drones hit the Azot plant. Right there, right next to it, I don't know, it's just burning. The fire is devouring everything. Just so you understand, the smoke is still coming out. Can you believe it? Nothing, yeah. Lightning, friends, August 22 and 23. And a series of powerful attacks on Russia. Moscow and St. Petersburg are under attack. Explosions in Sevastopol. Bases are burning. Cargo. Trains carrying fuel were destroyed in the Moscow region and in Jankoy. In Novorossiysk, a naval drone eliminated elite divers of the Russian Navy. Everything is on fire. This is a disaster, gentlemen. The security service struck the Druzhba oil pipeline and the largest oil refineries. There is panic in Russia and gasoline prices are rising. Meanwhile, Donald Trump declares that it is impossible to win the war without striking Russia, and he is ready to provide Ukraine with long-range JASSM and Tomahawk missiles. If the meeting between Zelensky and Putin falls through, there will be tough secondary sanctions against Russia. And for Putin, this is the end. The era of large-scale pressure on Putin has begun. This is now a real drone and missile war that is destroying Putin's military machine from within. The new Flamingo missile, with a range of 3,000 kilometers, is heading for St. Petersburg and Moscow. At the same time, Trump is putting pressure on the Kremlin. He promises Ukraine long-range American JASSM and Tomahawk missiles, and he warns that very interesting times lie ahead. He threatens sanctions if the negotiations with Putin fall through. Yermak has already named possible venues for a meeting between Zelensky, Putin, and Trump, ranging from Geneva to Istanbul. Saudi Arabia is also in question. What does this mean for the future of the war and Putin's survival? Let's discuss all of this right now with the well-known journalist Olesia Batsman. Olesia, I'm very glad to see you.
Dasha, I'm glad to see you too. Friends, I welcome you all. Well, let's get started and discuss.
You know, I'm really glad that we're meeting at the end of the week because Trump made a sensational statement. Trump is announcing an era of pressure on Putin. Wow. There it is. All right, damn it, bastard. Most likely American missiles could be transferred to Ukraine. How do you assess this era of pressure on Putin? Before they meet with Zelensky in Istanbul, Geneva, or Saudi Arabia.
If you truly want to achieve anything significant from Russia, you absolutely have to apply considerable pressure on Russia, and it unequivocally has to be very tough and unwavering pressure. Without pressure, without sanctions, without strikes, Putin will not make any concessions, nor agree to any terms acceptable to us. Nothing will happen. He will keep going, twisting arms, deceiving, dodging, scheming, striking in every way. He won't do anything. I'm not even talking about the fact that, in principle, the discourse we're all in right now regarding the fact that that we need to negotiate with Russia about some kind of peace with Putin's Russia, where Putin and his junta remain in power. So this discourse itself, well, of course, in a just world, it shouldn't exist, because in a just world, we should be talking about regime change in Russia. And then an agreement with Russia, a peace treaty, the end of the war, and in general, peaceful life with the rebuilding of Ukraine and so on. With Putin, no matter what happens, no matter how things turn out, it's impossible to reach an agreement. He has a wound, a festering sore in his mind in the form of Ukraine. That will never change. It's already clear. At this age, people don't change. Nothing will happen. And if he remains in power, he will be a risk factor, a threat both to Ukraine and to other countries, including NATO countries. It's very good that NATO countries understand this. Everyone who lives around Russia, next to Russia, hasn't been very lucky with their neighbor, to put it mildly. They understand this well. They understand that Putin is always a threat. But we still have. Naturally, in this regard, we can't. For now, for this present moment, I must emphasize we cannot influence anything at all, because I firmly believe that we currently have this particular option. And there is a possibility that in the end, Dasha, the entire civilized world, will move from discussing how to come to an agreement with Putin, well, in a way that would be at least somewhat acceptable for Ukraine, to discussing how to change the regime in Russia, remove Putin, and negotiate with those who come after him. And Putin, accordingly, along with all his public figures, would be put on trial, investigated, and so on and so forth. That is to start all the standard procedures in this sense. So let's get back to what we have right now. Right now, we have this so-called attempt to initiate a peace process started by Donald Trump, for which, of course, we are grateful to him, because we still hope that this will lead to an end to the war. But I'm not talking about peace, about long-term peace right now. Let's just talk about stopping the war for now, but it has to be done in such a way that it doesn't amount to a Ukrainian capitulation. And thank God, absolutely everyone understands this, and everyone is fighting for it. By everyone, I mean not only Ukraine, our leadership, Ukrainians, but also our partners, Western partners, Europeans, the head of NATO, the head of the European Commission, Trump. Does Trump understand this? Maybe he would like to turn a blind eye to it, but considering that everyone around him, everyone is saying that under no circumstances can we stop the war at Ukraine's expense, he is surrounded not only by Europeans, but also by his own American people who stand by this as well, journalists, congressmen. Republicans, not just Democrats, Republicans, his own party members, his most hardcore electorate, they are also on Ukraine's side today, and that's important. That's why we have a chance for this peace process. Now, how exactly is the situation developing? Of course, everyone has undoubtedly noticed Donald Trump's recent post on social media about how he has truly moved on from seeking applause and public adulation. The one he gave to Putin in Alaska, he moved on to threats. Look, the two photos he included in that post were carefully chosen. Yes, where is he standing? And right there, yes, our viewers have just seen it. First of all, he chose a photo where he is standing. And not the one where he's applauding Putin, but he chose a photo where he's showing him something, meaning he wants something from him, or he's not giving him any orders. I don't know. But judging by the rhetoric, it was something quite tough on his part. Very assertive. So he chose that photo. And he picked a photo from Soviet times, where the United States president is effectively schooling Nikita Khrushchev. Back then, yes, at that particular historical moment, when the United States government truly understood the significant role and the crucial place of the Soviet Union in global affairs, and profoundly realized that without implementing substantial and corrective measures, absolutely nothing would genuinely work as intended. In other words, there would be chaos on the planet, and irreversible processes would begin. This is very important, because before this, look, this is a worldview issue, a historical thing right now, Before this, Trump had never entered into this discourse. This is the second time you see during our broadcast that I'm using this word, but it's very important. That is, he never immersed himself in the environment of such conversations. And essentially, the understanding that the Soviet Union is an evil empire, and this photo, that's what it's about. Because before this, he was always in the discourse about how the Soviet Union and its successor, Russia, are superpowers. It's an empire, it's a big country. Sometimes you treat it with respect and sometimes even with admiration. So that's how he saw it. He would forget all the evil that both the Soviet Union and now Russia have brought and continue to bring. And these two photos are precisely about this aspect, the most fundamental one. What kind of empire is this really? Well, if he insists on calling it an empire, what is its essence? What is it built on? It's built on fear, on the enslavement of people, on killings, on deaths, on total tightening of the screws, on poverty. That's what it's built on. If he wants an empire, you see? And these photos, they were very important, actually even more important than what he wrote in the tweet itself. What he wrote was good too. After all, he basically said what we've been saying since the very first day of the big war. And what we've been saying is, look, just give us weapons, we're not asking anyone to go and defend Ukrainian land instead of us. We're not asking for that. We're only asking for resources, for weapons. We'll defend ourselves and ultimately you as well. But give us these weapons so that we can, not just because, listen, not a single person. I've always said in interviews, look, there won't be any major breakthrough, no resolution. We won't be able to turn the situation around until the war spills over onto Russian territory. As long as Russians live peacefully, eat well, sleep soundly, especially Muscovites and people from St. Petersburg, well, we're talking about the places where revolutions happen, the capitals, nothing will change. They'll just be enjoying themselves, watching Ukrainians being killed, their own regime killing Ukrainians, while they sit back and drink, coconut milk cappuccinos. That's it.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
That's why Trump essentially said the most important thing. The war needs to spill over onto Russian territory. The aggressor must feel that evil does not go unpunished, that if you go to war, then here, take this war, feel this war, and maybe then something will change. And now we come to the topic of missiles. You mentioned the Flamingo. Yes, indeed, we have the Flamingo missile. And yes, it really does have a range of 3,000 kilometers. And let me remind our viewers that if you take, say, the distance from Ukraine's borders to Moscow by air, depending on the exact point, but still, well, that's about 1 to 1,500 kilometers. You feel that, right, friends? This one flies up to 3,000, and to Moscow, it's only, well, let's say 1,500. So, what exactly is this particular missile capable of? Moreover, it is certainly not the only missile we currently possess. Right now, we are not just actively developing. We have already successfully completed extensive tests, and we now have things that can, in quotes, truly surprise and genuinely delight those who have unfortunately come to us with war. But it's not about Ukraine, let me say this right away. This is important. It's not about Ukraine bombing residential buildings in Moscow. We're not Russia, we're not barbarians. Do you understand? No. The crucial and fundamental point is that for Ukraine, the primary targets are indeed military facilities and also strategic decision-making sites where the Russian regime is currently located. Those are the targets for Ukraine, of course, but definitely not civilians. And what Trump specifically says about American weapons, you can clearly see it just fits together perfectly like a complex puzzle. What does that mean? Now let's keep reading, let's go deeper. This means that in all likelihood, Trump significantly overestimated his own strength and capabilities, as well as his power of persuasion, maybe, I don't know, perhaps even his personal charisma and his unique charm. Well, at least apparently it didn't really have much of an effect on Putin, at least not in any meaningful or noticeable way. Because I understand, well, look, of course, we can all be wrong since none of us can truly get inside Trump's or Putin's head or fully comprehend their innermost thoughts and motivations. But we can, nevertheless, analyze and more or less assess to the best of our abilities how each of them behaves in various situations and what each one ultimately wants or desires. You know what I mean? That's precisely why I am absolutely sure, almost entirely certain, yes, that Donald Trump, of course, Trump himself gave Vladimir Putin such an incredibly warm and genuinely welcoming reception because he wanted essentially to effectively take him hostage with this remarkably good attitude, with promising economic prospects, and with the significant prospect of ultimately ending the ongoing war. But no other US president would have given him such an opportunity and guarantees of safety for himself, his family, his businessmen, for everyone, for the regime. But he needs to agree to reasonable terms and end the war with Ukraine. Anyone else, of course, in Putin's place would have jumped at this chance without a second thought, but not this ghoul. He has, I repeat, these kinds of things stuck in his head. Trump was sure that because of this, that's why he told the Europeans. Remember, the microphone was on, friends. And Trump didn't know he was being recorded when Volodymyr Zelensky and all the European leaders came to see him after Alaska. And when he was persuading them, he said, why, look, Putin wants a peace deal. So Zelensky and all the others were telling him, are you kidding? He doesn't want a peace deal. He wants to fight. He just wants to deceive. He doesn't want you to impose sanctions. And accordingly, he would have the means to wage war. That's it. He doesn't want it, they said. But Trump was trying to convince them. And I am sure he genuinely believes that. He says, no, he wants a peace deal. Come on, why would he want war? The prospects are way better without it. And he knew what he was talking about. He painted much better prospects for him if there was no war, if the sanctions on Russia were lifted. And he said the following phrase, friends, with the microphone on, Putin will agree to this peace deal only because of me, just for me. He wants it, he'll do it for me. And then he added, no matter how strange or fantastic it may sound, that's how it is. So, you see, he believed that he had, well, charmed him on a personal level, recruited him, whatever you want to call it, basically won him over. That is to say, when someone genuinely has a good and positive attitude toward you, when they truly want to do this particular thing for you and that other specific thing for you, well, naturally, you want to reciprocate, to express your sincere gratitude and thank him. You have some inherent inclination to do so, right? That's just fundamental human nature. But that's only if we're talking about other people. This situation is something else entirely, you see, involving completely different neural connections. Trump didn't take that into account despite all his experience. No. So what happens? So Trump was sure, by the way, if you want some insider info, I can give it to you and our viewers about the red carpet. That wasn't Donald Trump's initiative. It wasn't the Americans' idea. It was a condition set by the Russians. And the demand for the red carpet came shortly before the meeting itself. Basically, it was like blackmail. Either the meeting gets cancelled now or not. And, you understand, in that situation, of course, the American side didn't make a fuss. So you want it? Fine. Here, he'll get his red carpet. And I think that I don't really know. It's just that my reliable sources, yes, my trusted American sources explicitly told me precisely how and exactly when it originally appeared. But I think it's also intrinsically connected to the undeniable fact that since it was done in a considerable rush and literally came up, just suddenly popped up like that, without any prior warning or preparation. Because of that, the carpet was brought and laid out by the military. I mean, if this had been discussed in advance and everything had been thought through, yes, by those responsible for protocol and organization, of course, they wouldn't have let the military in uniform, who represent the defense and security of the US, do it. You understand? In other words, this would clearly have been done by other people, just workers in some kind of neutral uniform, so that it wouldn't look for the whole world and for Russian propaganda, as terrible as that image did, when American soldiers on their knees are rolling out a red carpet under Putin's plane where his backside is sitting with a huge Russia sign. You get it, right? That's how it all happened. Because for us, we already saw it like that back then. And behind the scenes, it was exactly as I told you, you see? And that's why just how important it really was for Trump, because he considers himself, he says, I'm the king of deals. Well, listen, he even has a book with that very title, friends. I don't know if any of you have read it or not. But really, he has always prided himself on the fact that in business, where he achieved success, he could make a deal with anyone, even the devil himself. And so he thought he could do the same thing here and now. Look, and when the first signs appeared, we immediately picked up on them, starting with the fact that, look, if Putin wanted a deal, a peaceful deal, as Trump says, then he wouldn't be killing children and civilians in Ukraine. But he was bombing directly. I mean, on the very night they arrived, he was bombing Ukraine, and there were a lot of casualties, Kharkiv and other cities. We remember all of this. And the next day when they were leaving, he bombed all night again. So even on air, you and I said, look, okay, even if you know nothing about Putin, just look at what he's doing. Let's focus now on his specific actions, not at the front. No, not the front lines. These are civilians. These are private homes. It's nighttime. These are children who were hit by a Russian missile, specifically deliberately. See, look, so Trump didn't pick up on any of these, how should I put it, signals, these gifts. He ignored it. It doesn't matter. There's a goal. I'm moving toward it. I see no obstacles, and everything else is irrelevant. All right. But then came the statements. So Trump didn't get it right away, did he? But then Putin, through his talking heads, started to spell it out for him, first with Ushakov's statements, now Lavrov's, and they're all singing the same tune. No negotiations between Zelensky and Putin. Meanwhile, Trump came out and said one thing, that he and Putin are so close, and that Putin promised him, even when he just spoke to him, that there would first be a meeting between Putin and Zelensky, and it would happen by the end of the month. So that means within 2 weeks. Then the three of us would meet, but then these guys came out and said, what negotiations? No, we never talked about that. Well, we can raise the level of the delegation. We agreed to keep negotiating, but they're just stalling for time. Putin is stalling so that Trump doesn't impose sanctions. And Putin consistently kept shelling, relentlessly kept destroying Ukraine. In other words, he persistently kept doing his dirty work. Then just look, the statement is more than abundantly clear. And here I truly think when they were telling Trump this and that and so on, and we're not analyzing absolutely everything, we're just taking some of the most striking and prominent examples right now. But when they told him, look, there is absolutely no discernible sign that Putin genuinely wants peace, he simply brushed it off. Because he was absolutely sure, well, how could it possibly be otherwise? Surely they talked about something significant. Then somehow he must have promised him something. He was sure that he would get him to that point. But when his own people came out and directly contradicted Trump's words, I think he was taken aback. And then why did this post appear here? Moreover, well, a post is one thing, but it's another matter what's happening behind the scenes. When all the Europeans, not just the Europeans, but led by Rubio, whom Trump appointed to do this, in other words, America, with Trump fully involved, started discussing concrete security guarantees for Ukraine. That is, they had already moved on to specifics. Though, jumping from that question, who exactly? Putin stopped, and it's as if he already said, that's it, I'm not fighting anymore. Well, it doesn't matter. Actually, it does matter. Look, really, I'm just saying this now, right? But this is an extremely important story. For the first time in all the years of the major war, and in fact the war that began in 2014, the leaders of countries actually sat down with Ukraine at the table to discuss security guarantees from Russia and accordingly from all sorts of other attacks. This is very important. And the security guarantees, again, according to my sources, were shaping up to be very good for us. No, not NATO. Well, that's not on the table yet. Listen, you can't force someone to like you if they don't want to accept you. But they could have been very good, really very good. These are truly strong security guarantees. I discussed this with the military. Everyone was there and they said, look, if it turns out the way it's shaping up now, and if there's a NATO country's contingent on Ukrainian territory, that's an absolute must-have. And everyone was ready for this. And first and foremost, the significant strengthening of Ukraine's vital military-industrial complex and the crucial payment of comprehensive reparations, regardless of whether they extensively discussed them as frozen assets or otherwise in any form or manner. So basically, it all added up to the fact that if things went this way, in a few years, we would become the strongest country outside of NATO. But among NATO countries, you know what I mean? Economically, militarily, and industrially, we become number one. Because right now our army, our manpower is number one. No NATO country, no NATO army, let's be more precise, no NATO army possesses what we have in terms of military resources. Well, this is the best experience, the best application, the best of everything. In other words, everyone is learning. But if the kind of security guarantees they're discussing now actually happen, then in a few years we really will become a superpower. And we, not forgetting, even considering how many have left, and of course all this destruction. But we are the largest country in Europe, and surely at least half of those who left will return when peace comes. Well, that's how it is. No one knows exactly how many right now because it will really depend on what kind of peace it will be. That is, what conditions, what kind of security guarantees. But we're saying more or less that at least half will definitely come back. So the largest country in Europe will have the most powerful army and military industrial complex. when we ourselves will be able to protect anyone we want, considering that. You see, those are the kinds of security guarantees. Well, and Trump agrees with that because look, he gives it to Putin. Putin said the main thing is not NATO. He gives him that. That is, he already gave in to him on this and that and so on. And then Lavrov comes out and starts talking again, saying, what kind of bases and military country on the territory of Ukraine? We would never in our lives. We won't agree to that there. I think that drove Trump mad. And that's precisely when, he just completely snapped. This was because they had previously agreed upon something entirely different with him, a prior arrangement that was then disregarded. He rolled out the red carpet for him, he applauded him, he spent his political capital on him. With his support, his reputation, everything he had, he sacrificed it all for him to make this happen. But there was no reciprocity. Well, there couldn't have been, but that's something we understand. But he tried. Look, he did it, he made the attempt. And now, when he lost his temper and that post appeared, because I repeat, that post is just the tip of the iceberg. Because the main thing is the actions that are happening, already taking place behind the scenes, so to speak, of that post. Another interesting point. I think our attentive viewers also undoubtedly noticed that, according to recent and significant information from various Western media outlets, several prominent and influential publications wrote extensively about this today. The United States of America has officially suspended, or rather completely banned, as they explicitly put it, the crucial sharing of vital intelligence data with their, and please pay close attention to this, absolutely closest, most trusted and dearest partners and allies. This is the so-called Five Eyes, an Anglo-Saxon group that has traditionally and historically always shared crucial intelligence information with each other. This enduring collaboration exists because they profoundly consider each other their closest and most trusted allies, possessing deeply intertwined and mutually beneficial strategic interests. They develop in the same direction. And when it comes to intelligence data, they always share it. So this particular group of nations includes the United States, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, Australia, and, if you could just remind me, Canada, of course.
The English-speaking world. Yes, yes.
So this is certainly an important decision, and it's an unconventional one. The United States, as it were, has effectively banned, or more precisely suspended, its crucial ability to share vital intelligence information concerning the ongoing negotiations that the US government is currently conducting regarding the eventual cessation of Russia's protracted and devastating war against Ukraine with its key international partners and allies. That concludes our discussion on this particular topic, so we shall now stop here. What does this mean? Because you see, what's important here is what's behind this. This is an important fact, important news. But why is this happening? Do you understand? This is what's important here. On the one hand, maybe now, so you can just try to break it down and analyze what lies behind this. Perhaps at this very moment, we are truly entering into an exceptionally significant and pivotal phase of unfolding events that are poised to develop with remarkable and unprecedented rapidity. And because of this, well, the value of any leaked information, which could also end up in Russian hands about how, what, where, and what the US said and what they meant, the cost of a mistake is too high if it gets to them ahead of time. Because they want to do everything quickly and exactly as they planned. Maybe that's the reason. In other words, they're very afraid of leaks right now because this is the most crucial phase, I repeat. On the other hand, you could also develop the idea that maybe they want to promise Russia something that they don't want their partners to find out about. You see? Here too, one might reasonably ask, well, we genuinely do not know, does such an alternative option truly have the inherent right to exist? And is it indeed a truly viable and sustainable solution? Well, probably, yes. What other options are there? So what could be behind this? I think this says, let's put it this way. What we can say for sure is that since this is happening, this topic, the end of Russia's war against Ukraine, is very important personally to the President of the United States. Look, right now it has become personal for him. And the fact that this happened shows that he is truly fully immersed in this. Why? Because, well, maybe he would actually like to withdraw completely from the negotiations, to distance himself altogether since things aren't working out. But he's already so deeply involved in this story that, again, his own American society simply won't let him just walk away. So now some kind of result is needed. He really wants to achieve it. And again, nothing has changed. He really wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize? That's precisely why it's abundantly clear that now, as we extensively discussed just a week, 2, or even 3 weeks ago, truly rapid and intensely significant events are indeed starting to powerfully unfold, and we can readily observe them, meticulously analyze them, thoughtfully comment on them, and that's exactly what we'll consistently keep doing. We'll keep telling you what we know. But where all of this will ultimately lead, we shall certainly see.
Yes, I'd like us to wrap up the following point. So, Trump wants to win the Nobel Peace Prize on October 10th. Putin's birthday is on October 7th. Now, Trump was asked about this. He said, "We're waiting 2 weeks and then we'll change our tactics." And let's go over this to finalize everything. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking the aggressor country. We're in for interesting times. Trump could provide long-range missiles. New York Post, Russia is delaying the establishment of peace in Ukraine. Trump needs to put pressure on Putin to put an end to the killings once and for all. An editorial article was published under this headline, and now there's already a cover like this where essentially Trump's finger is pressing down on Putin. It's an allegory. The journalist went on to emphasize that the only language Putin understands is financial. The Russian economy is already under strain due to enormous military spending, rapid inflation, and sanctions. Therefore, additional sanctions that will hit Putin need to be imposed immediately. And accordingly, Lindsey Graham also made a statement that she will seek to have Russia recognized as a state sponsor of terrorism. And this is very serious. Oles, to wrap up our conversation today, what do you think will happen in the next 2 weeks? Option 1. A. Putin agrees to a meeting with Zelensky, as Yermak said. It could take place in Geneva, Saudi Arabia, or Istanbul. These are the 3 cities. So, Riyadh, Geneva, and Istanbul are acceptable to Zelensky because Budapest does not suit him. Well, obviously, neither does Moscow. Or nothing will happen and Trump will be forced to impose sanctions to deliver missiles and escalate too.
Look, any option is acceptable for us. What we need to understand, the main thing, friends, is that in this situation, any development will work in our favor, no matter how that may sound. Option 1. If Vladimir Putin does indeed refuse and ultimately backs out of a crucial one-on-one meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, then what will happen? Well, that's actually fine by us, more than fine, because that inevitably leads to Trump imposing those very significant sanctions. Trump in turn gives us all the necessary weapons, absolutely everything we could possibly need, whatever we truly need, and in the precise quantities we specifically require. And we, along with the entire international community and personally as well, start putting pressure on Russia the way it deserves. And here we're talking about the war fully shifting onto the enemy's territory, onto the aggressor's land. So this scenario is absolutely acceptable for us. The second scenario is if, under Trump's pressure, Putin now agrees to a bilateral meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. How will events develop further? Well, look, in my opinion, even if this meeting happens now, it won't change anything on a global scale. Because I don't believe that Putin will agree to the conditions that are acceptable to us. And Volodymyr Zelensky will not give up either Ukrainian interests or Ukrainian territories. We can be sure of that as well. Because after all, there is Ukrainian society, there is the Ukrainian constitution, which Volodymyr Zelensky has mentioned more than once. So even if a meeting does take place, a meeting between them after some time, because, well, they might agree on something somehow, somewhere, but on a global scale, this won't get Trump a peace prize, because the war won't end because of that. Why won't it end? Because of whom? Because of Russia. Because of Putin. Because he will keep dragging things out and keep twisting arms. But in one way or another, it will still inevitably lead to Donald Trump being ultimately forced to impose significant sanctions and provide crucial weapons to Ukraine, a move that would have profound implications. So, to sum up, both the first and the second scenario lead to America imposing sanctions against Russia and giving weapons to Ukraine. It's just that with the first scenario, we get there faster. With the second scenario, it will probably take a bit longer for all this to happen. But if it's the third scenario where Putin agrees to terms acceptable to Ukraine and there really is a freeze or even a peace treaty, that's possible. But I give that scenario, I don't know, 1, 2, maybe 3% chance.
Friends, of course, I understand that now we live in a 2-week period, right? Because Trump's favorite time frame is 2 weeks. Obviously, Olesia and I meet at the end of each week to discuss the key events. Just now, Olesia laid out for you a crossroads, 3 possible scenarios that could happen. Let me remind you, today is August 22nd, 23rd. This means that there is only 1 week left until the end of August, so when Olesia and I meet next week, it will be practically September. And without a doubt, Putin's 0 hour is simply melting before our eyes. Most likely, whether he agrees or not, as we understand, the war will not end. And further on, most likely there will be a new phase, a phase of pressure on Putin, when we will attack with missiles, drones, and there will be sanctions. Of course, Olesia and I will meet next week and discuss the new developments. The well-known journalist Olesia Batsman. Olesia, I am very grateful to you, and I'm sure that next week there will be another reason to discuss something with an even newer and more interesting force. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dasha. Thank you, friends. We'll stay in touch.